So we're all supposed to get an electric vehicle. Isn't that going to be fun? It's not a bad idea. I have no particular love affair with the internal combustion engine, but we'll get into a minute my stipulations for what an electric vehicle needs to do before I'm even going to think about buying one. But the whole of the Liberals' green plan revolves around ideas like we can all just easily switch over to electric vehicles and there won't be any notice. You won't feel any change in your lifestyle or your pocketbook or anything like that. But it's just fantasy. Like most of the Liberals' green plan, it's just make-believe. Joining me today is my friend Lorrie Goldstein from the Toronto Sun. I'm Lorne Gunter from the Edmonton Sun. Lorrie, would you think about buying an electric vehicle?
Not right now, because they're more expensive than a conventional building, and they don't have the range. Consumer Reports said in 2019 advised people living in cold climates, if you're going to buy an electric vehicle, get twice the range that it advertises, so you don't get stranded out in the middle of a snowstorm. In other words, batteries. The problem with batteries is they decrease power in the cold. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that look at what it's not just the federal government, it's provinces like Ontario, BC, and Quebec that are trying to create and prop up this industry. They're spending billions of dollars subsidizing auto manufacturers to retool for EV. Now, to be fair, that's how you get an auto plant today. So that money would be spent whether it was conventional or not. But then come the subsidies. The federal government and provinces like Quebec and BC give substantial taxpayer-funded subsidies to people of above average incomes to buy electric vehicles, because otherwise people won't buy them. And when you don't have those subsidies, you don't get good sales. Okay, so we're talking about billions of dollars there. Now there's charging them, right? You need to build up the infrastructure. Well, with internal combustion engine vehicles, the structure's already there. It's provided by the private sector. It's gasoline stations. It's repair shops. Well, now you have to create this across the country. That's going to be billions and billions of dollars. Then you have things like in Ontario, which doesn't have a subsidy, a direct subsidy. What they're going to do is introduce an ultra-low electricity price overnight. Now, what's that for? It's anticipating the charging of vehicles at home, where people will have to pay more to get the right connections to do it, right? And all of us who don't have will be paying for above income people to have their electricity cheap. I guess we can benefit if we want to do our laundry at 3:30 in the morning. But it's mainly to sort of prompt this issue. And then the Ontario government, when the Liberal government in Ontario was in power, they talked about their cap and trade plan. And in it, their numbers said that EV vehicles were an expensive way to reduce emissions. There were much cheaper ways to do it. For example, improve the environmental footprint of conventional fuels, that you would get a much bigger bang for your buck if you make the conventional product as clean as it can possibly be. So when you combine all these things, what is it, Lorne? It's that they're not ready for prime time. It's just like wind and solar power. They will someday, but it's not today.
It's the window dressing that advertises the dress for sale. And when you go into the shop, there are not only no dresses. I mean, there are no racks to hang dresses on. There's no change room. There isn't a cash register. It's all very hollow. I said in the intro that there were three things that an electric car would have to do, or electric truck would have to do before I would consider buying one. It has to go as far as my internal combustion engine. My internal combustion engine now will go 800 kilometers between fill-ups. It has to be refueled or recharged as quickly as I can refuel, which is under 5 minutes. That's not happening anytime, I think, in my lifetime, certainly not in the next decade or so. And it has to be as reliable in a Canadian winter as an internal combustion engine is. And there is nothing that's being sold now with an electric motor in it that is as reliable as an internal combustion engine. As I said, I'm not married to the ICE, the internal combustion engine, but I am not switching over to electric when it's completely impractical to do so. And then, when you look at the infrastructure, the estimate is that in order to charge all of the vehicles that we would be buying that are electric by 2035, when Trudeau says he's going to outlaw the sale of internal combustion engines in Canada, you'd have to build 12 new nuclear plants between now and 2035. Nobody even has one on the drawing board, much less going through the approval process, dealing with the protesters, trying to find neighbors who would sell the land for it. Yeah, none of that is there. And you know how many operating nuclear plants we have in Canada now? 6. So we'd have to double the number of nuclear plants to carry out Trudeau's plan, and that is just not going to happen. The whole thing about this is it's terribly, terribly impractical. It's not just replacing the 11,000 gasoline stations there are in Canada. It's not just making new nuclear plants or hydroelectric dams. It's changing all of those things, because the electric car is very different, much more different than it appears on the outside. And so I just think the whole thing is terribly impractical.
Well, look, there's a whole bunch of practical problems too. In Canada, we're relatively good in terms of we don't have a lot of coal-fired electricity, but we do have some. And in other countries, coal-fired electricity is dominant. If you have coal-fired electricity and now you've suddenly got hundreds of thousands of these new cars, you don't get an environmental benefit, because the electricity that takes it are polluting. I'll give you a personal example. I have a cousin in California. He has a Tesla. We went out for a ride in it. It was beautiful. It was the stopping was like excellent. It uses the engine power. In California, it's great. He's retired, very wealthy former executive. As I recall, the Tesla he bought was somewhere between $200,000 and $300,000, and great for him, and great for people who in California, where it's not a huge problem. So the technology will get there, but the problem is it isn't there now. And this is the alternative I would suggest. Instead of pouring more and more money into these things, would you look at the auto sector? In recent years, they have dramatically improved emissions and pollutants. When the government says, well, this will replace 24 million cars, the only reason it's 24 million cars is because the auto industry has done such a good job of, right, and the oil and gas sector, of making cleaner fuels. So what I would be saying to people is, we want you to buy just the car that you need. We're not going to tax you if you buy a pickup truck and you need it for your work. But like in Toronto, we have people running around with these giant, in Forest Hill, in Rosedale, like it's become a status symbol to have these ludicrously overpowered SUVs and pickup trucks. So the message to me would be, no, electricity isn't there yet. But what we can do now is that we can only buy the amount of car we need. You can keep it well tuned. That's the most important thing. And we can lower emissions then, while this other technology that isn't ready for prime time is ramping up. The same way we could do about energy. Okay, we need nuclear power and natural gas to replace coal. Those are the fuels to use now until wind and solar are ready for prime time. They're not. But what they do instead is that they are trying to create a market where the technology isn't ready. And so how many billions of dollars we're going to waste on that, particularly in Canada, where you have to have reliable heat, you have to have reliable transportation. We're a big country, we're a cold country, we're a relatively isolated country. We're not like Europe, where you can drive across the entire country in less than a day. I think it could be a disaster. It really could be.
Now, we got about a minute left, but so I just want to touch on a column that you had published in the Toronto Sun about how the Liberals have failed yet again to meet their emission targets and what the implications are for that.
Yeah, look, for 2020, we've just got the numbers. The Trudeau government failed to meet its 2020 emission target. This is the 9th time a federal government, going back to 1988, 5 of them Liberal, 4 of them Conservative, had set a target and failed to meet it. So let's stop the stupidity of these targets. Let's talk about emissions reductions after they've already occurred, not predictions of what they will be. And finally, to be fair, one thing I should say, because it's so rare that the Trudeau government does something sensible on the energy file, they have approved the Bay du Nord offshore oil project in Newfoundland and Labrador. It still has to go through a lot of hoops, but it will give, I think it's $12 billion in investment, jobs for people in Newfoundland, tax revenues for the government. And also, it's a Norwegian company in Canada meaning another example of democracies having access to freedom oil, as opposed to what we've now learned is a disaster when you rely on dictator oil from places like or people like Putin. And so to give the government credit where it's due, one good thing. I wish they would have been as cooperative with the conservative governments in Saskatchewan and Alberta as they were with the Liberal government in Newfoundland and Labrador in doing this. But to be fair, they made the right decision, and we congratulate them on it.
That's a topic for another day, the way they're going to hose Alberta and Saskatchewan to make room for the emissions from Newfoundland. But anyway, that's the end of our emissions for today. If you have a comment, please leave it below. If you haven't already, please subscribe to our YouTube channel and look for our posts on all the major social media networks. I'm Lorne Gunter, and thanks again to Lorrie Goldstein.